All right, welcome everybody. It's good to see you. We will finish up in Luke 5 tonight, and then we'll move into our story in John 2. And once again, our goal in all of these scenes that we're studying is to just see how Jesus responded, how he acted, decisions he made, choices he made, people he interacted with. And just as we go through this, I hope you'll continue to focus on the idea of what does this mean to me? What, not only being inspired by Jesus and the man he was, but how do we go about emulating that the best we can? And so I hope you'll continue to think about that. But last time we looked at Jesus and going out and calling his disciples, and we'll just continue that story really as we look in Luke and John. Let's bow and pray, and then we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful to you for this time we can be together, that we can encourage each other, we can honor you in the things that we do. We're thankful for your word, that you have preserved it for us, and that you have given us your will so that we know your expectations of us. We're thankful for your Son, Jesus Christ, his sacrifice. We're thankful that you loved us so much that you gave your Son so that we could live eternally with you. We ask that you would help us to be like Christ, that we would put on Christ, that we would do your will in everything that we do, and that we would seek to sacrifice and to serve others. We pray all these things in Jesus' name, and amen. Last time we looked at Jesus as after he had been tempted, he went and was teaching and ended up having to go out into a boat. People were crowding in on him so much, and so he went and taught on the boat, performed a sign there of a catch of fish for the fishermen that were there, and then called these men to come, and he just said, "Follow me." And what was their response? It said they left everything and followed him. And so we see this picture of Jesus finding his team to take on this most important mission in the history of the world. And I'll ask you again, so who did he pick? What were the qualities of the people that he picked to take on this mission? What are some of the qualities you see? Okay. These are people that were respectful of Jesus. They were believers. We see even whenever this huge catch of fish happened, Peter just said, "I'm not worthy to even be in your presence." And so they recognized Jesus. In fact, we see even Andrew right off the bat. When he saw Jesus and what had happened with John the Baptist, he ran to Peter and told him what? Yeah, I found the Messiah. Clearly, they'd been thinking about it. They were looking for the Messiah, and he said, "I found him." And so we see this faith that they have. What other qualities did these people have that might have caused Jesus to select them? And you said two things there I think are just really important to this. First of all, they're hardworking people. They were doing jobs that were not easy. They took a lot of skill and effort, and they were real people. And you also said they were common people. And I want to come back to that in a minute, because I think the idea that these weren't the spiritual elite, the religious elite in the community. These were just regular guys. Other thoughts about why these men? He selected men that were young too. Why select young men? Yeah, I wouldn't have understood that before. I'm 53 now, and 53 or 54, I can't remember. That tells you something. Man, I just can't. I don't have as much energy and endurance and strength, and these were people that had the ability to do it even physically, and also the emotional energy and the vigilance to do it. Yes? Yeah, and they might have had some connections, but they really were just able to drop everything and go. And so their ability to just go on this mission was also helpful. But I also think, and the comment that was made about the fact that they were common people, I believe it was very important because they were compatible with the target audience. And I hate to use that. That makes it sound like a business. But that's the concept here, is that they were about to go out and bring the gospel. And I believe the fact that they were common people was because they were compatible with who the audience was that was going to be taught. And so I'd encourage you last time to really just think about that and think about how much we see Jesus gravitating to the lowly and the disenfranchised and the people that were so needy. In fact, I like in Luke 4, when the story in Luke 4 and starting in verse 17, when he was going into the temple, remember it says he was handed the book to read, and he selected a passage to read out of Isaiah. And this is really, to me, this is a launching point. This is really just a point in which we see Jesus almost laying down the gauntlet of here's what I'm all about. And he selected this passage Isaiah that said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who were oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Just to see this mantra of Jesus and his mission, it says, I'm anointed to preach the gospel to the poor, to the brokenhearted, to the blind, captives, prisoners. That's the picture of who Jesus saw as those who were the audience for the gospel. Matthew 11, you could probably quote it by heart, but Matthew 11 and verse 28, where it says, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light. This is so important to me, that what is he bringing people? What is the gospel bringing people in this quote? There's an outcome of what Jesus is bringing them. What does it say? Rest. And I like the word relief. That a gospel is going to people who are seeking a Savior, a Messiah. We almost have lost the strength of those terms to understand that this is about people who are desperate to be saved. And Jesus says, come to me and I'm going to give you rest. He even uses an analogy here that seems maybe counterintuitive, that I'm going to put a yoke on you, but my yoke is easy. The burden is light. And so just the fact that he says, I'm looking for people who are needing to be relieved and needing rest. John 4, I won't go to it, but in John 4 we see the picture of him having an interaction with the Samaritan woman, an outcast, a person that they would not have expected him to interact with. And he interacts with her so respectfully and teaches her such amazing things about what worship is going to be in his new kingdom. The idea to me is to see that Jesus is about the lowly. That is the target audience. Is that who we most often are seeking to teach? Is that the picture in your head of who you are when you're seeking people to bring the gospel to, when we seek to evangelize to people? Is that usually who we gravitate to? Perhaps you do. I don't want to imply that you don't. I think for a lot of people, including myself, I'm probably looking for someone that's middle class like me. Maybe somebody, or sometimes we're targeting people who are already religious, going to a different church or a different denomination, or a lot of times that's not who we're looking for. In fact, there are times in which we avoid the people that maybe Jesus gravitated to. Or if a person that maybe would have sat at a table with Jesus or that Jesus would have spent time with, there are people that may walk in the back door of our building and it might put us all on edge. But in reality, Jesus sought them and knew that the poor and the helpless and disenfranchised were who he was after. Jesus interacted with people like this. In fact, we see in this story that he was sitting with tax collectors and sinners, and he was reprimanded for that. I will admit, I grew up, it's a hard thing because, I have kids now that have grown up and gone through schools, and I understand the idea of wanting to try to make sure that my kids are not in situations that might be bad influence, or they might not be in a situation where there might be danger. But it's just such a fine line. In fact, I think I may have heard growing up the Bible teaching on the concepts of a little leaven leavens the whole lump, the idea of bad company corrupts good morals, Those are ones that I heard a lot growing up. But I didn't learn a whole lot about how do I go about helping people who are lowly and in need, people that may be it may be unflattering, or it may be something that is a person in a very difficult situation. Yes.
Back in Matthew 11 that you just referenced, come to me all you labor and are heavy laden. Right before that, Jesus prays this little prayer, which is one of my favorite passages of Scripture, because it just gives us an insight into kind of a secret plan that God had. I mean, Jesus thanks the Father that he has hidden these things from the wise and prudent and has revealed them to babes. And he said, even so, Father, for so it seemed good in your sight. This was a plan.
Yeah.
And Jesus is unfolding this plan when he's reaching out to people. And what he's realizing is, we realized this, I'm sure, before, but the people that receive the word have an attitude of receptivity. And the most likely people who are going to have that are people who understand suffering and understand
whose lives are a total wreck. Yeah.
The rich, it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom because they feel like they don't need help, but they actually do. I mean, there's no such thing as a spiritually healthy person that doesn't need Jesus.
Yeah, well, and that's the idea that in fact, Missy said something to me one time. We were talking about canvassing neighborhoods, knocking on doors, and this church has done that even recently. And she said, here's one of the issues with the people sometimes we target with the gospel, is we go to people and knock on their door in their $500,000 home, and we're trying to bring them the good news. And in some cases, for them, it's bad news. We're trying to go to them with the relief and the rest of the gospel, and we're going to people who are extremely rested and extremely comfortable, as opposed to those who are desperate. Yes, please, Brian. Yeah. It's important to point out that the being poor is not the prerequisite. It is poor in spirit. It is the idea of having this willingness to respond. And so I appreciate you making that distinction, that Jesus didn't avoid people who were comfortable. He targeted the poor, but he certainly saw the value to someone who had a humble heart. Yes, Don.
Todd, to support what you have been saying, Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 1 says, "Then consider your calling, brethren, not many powerful, not many wealthy, not many of the world." Something like that. I don't know.
Understood, yeah. Well, yeah, and it flows all the way through, and it's for all. The gospel is for everyone. It is not. It is. I think about Matthew 25, and when the picture of the sheep and the goats, and when it says there's a criteria given there about who it was. It said, "Come to me," and what was it that he said those people were doing that are now called into eternity? He says, "When I was hungry, when I was thirsty, when I was in prison, he said, when you did it to these brothers, even the least of them," what does it say next? "You did it to me." And so this idea of demonstrating love, if you want to know how to love God, he tells us, you love the least of his brethren, and that is how we demonstrate our love to God. And so Jesus said, those are the people to be called. So I wanted to I think that there's just a real lesson to learn about the humility of Jesus and how he interacted with, and even just with the people he selected. I'd like to now look at really the next scenes that come through here, and if you can turn to John 2. And I'm going to look at this story of the wedding at Cana. We're actually going to look at, if we have time, I'd like to look at two different scenarios tonight that really happen one after the other in John 2. But counterintuitive, these are two scenes that we might not ever guess were representative of who Jesus was. With the wedding, and then whenever he goes into Jerusalem, whenever he enters Jerusalem. We'll look at those two stories now. But I will say, they are not ones we would expect represent who Jesus is, but we need to understand that. So in John 2, we see the scene, and first of all, we know that he went to this wedding, I suspect, socially. That clearly he wasn't there to perform some great wonder to convert people. He was pushing back at that idea. He went here to spend time with friends. And it says, on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "What business do you have with me, woman?" Let's stop there. If I ever spoke that way to my mother, I promise you, she might swing at me. But I suspect he was not being disrespectful in any way. But here's the scene that's painted. He goes to the wedding, and it says the wine ran out. Clearly, in this society and socially, this was a crisis. This was a situation at this wedding where it was a huge problem. And this indicates that his mother was involved in the planning or had some involvement and needed to help resolve this issue. But clearly, in this scenario, them running out of wine was an issue to the degree that she had to go and talk to Jesus about it. Why would she go and tell him? What's that? She knew his capabilities? Yeah? Do you think in her head she thought, well, he'll create some wine for us? I don't know what maybe she thought he had some connections. Maybe she thought he was just wise and could help deal with the situation. I don't know. But clearly he knew that she was asking him to do something special. Because he says, what's that to me, woman? It's just like, mother, why are you telling me this? And he knows clearly what she's insinuating, because he says, my hour has not yet come. What is he telling her? Why does he say that to her? Yeah, he's like, in this situation, it's not time for that yet. Was that what you said? It's not a good time for that. This is a lot of people here, and if we do something, it may be something that we can't control. We don't, but he just was saying it's not time yet. Now, the time was soon, but it just wasn't time. And so it's interesting how well his mother knows him, that after this, I wish I had the entire conversations written here. It was so interesting to hear the whole dialogue. But clearly after he said, my hour has not yet come, his mom knew what to do next. Yes, please.
Knowing what his mission was. This is small.
Yes.
This is not now.
This particular situation, it's not like healing the lame and the blind and some of the things, casting out demons. And this was not like some of the things he did in his ministry. But she was saying this is kind of a small potatoes thing, perhaps. She didn't say that exactly, but something like that. But his mother's response to it, I just love it. He says, what business is this? My hour has not yet come. And you can almost just see here telling the people, just do whatever he says. Whatever he tells you to do, just do it. And it's just, it's such a well-written scenario. I've watched some of The Chosen. I don't know, some of you may have watched The Chosen. And, it's one of those things you have to be, there's going to be real careful because there's a lot of theatrical in it and they add things to it. But they did a good job in that of demonstrating kind of how it might have played out in, a Palestinian, type of wedding. And so she just kind of walks off and tells the people to do what he says. Now there were 6 stone water pots standing there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 2 or 3 measures each. Jesus said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. And he said, fill the water pots with water. So they filled them up to the brim, and he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." And they took it to him. Now when the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the groom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the guests are drunk, he serves the poorer wine, but you have kept the good wine until now." And so we see a couple things here. One is that maybe Jesus was trying to, just do it under the radar a little bit. He just said, get the water pots, and then said, take it to the head waiter. And so what's the reaction to this wine now that has come from water? Yeah, he's saying this is the best stuff. You know what? And it's almost like, why did you serve that junk all night? And now you're serving the good stuff. And he says the poorer wine. And he says, you've kept the good wine until now. And then it says, this is the beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So we see that there was a response to this, that it says it created some in his disciples' belief when they heard about this and saw this. It says it revealed his glory. And so this scenario, just a small thing, asking someone to just get water in water pots and asking a person to taste it was so powerful that people saw it and believed. And I think for us, because we have heard the story of Jesus turning water to wine, sometimes we may not recognize the astounding nature of changing the physical nature of something. We talk about Jesus raising people from the dead and healing people, and we hear that so much sometimes. I think we don't realize how it was just blowing people away that he was able to take something physical and change it into something else, and of quality. This wasn't just food coloring being put in water, it was of quality. And so it says here that it revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So I just ask, what do we learn about Jesus from this? What qualities does this demonstrate about Jesus? Compassion. Okay, so one is compassion. What was the compassion for? He felt bad about the wedding's about to have some real big issues here, so he might have just said, I really feel bad that the people that got married are going to have a ruined reception. Yeah, that he made sure it was over the top.
Yeah, what did they do with the rest of it?
Yeah, it might have been famous, I don't know, but so one is that he connected it, and so I think we need to know also that this was compassion being shown for a simple everyday thing. This wasn't necessarily a spiritual thing. It was not something religious. It was trying to make sure that a wedding party didn't get ruined. What does that tell us about him? I mean, he's compassionate, but does that say anything about him? I think it really does help us understand that he cares about little things, everyday things, and that they're important. They make a difference. Other things, yes, please. He's a pretty good dude, yeah.
He said, I'm coming. And I did say, okay, come on. And man, we were half of them were still on the ground. We get them up in time so people would pick them up. Eventually they did. And so I just want to raise it. I mean,
Yeah.
Neil had a heart, such a heart for help. And he just told me to come do it. And I imagine Jesus did the same thing for the life. He just did it. He's talking to us. Well, we don't know. They asked for any permission or do you want me to come? He saw it and needed it.
He took care of it. Yeah. Well, it happened. Neil was compared to Jesus in our Bible class. So we all knew it was going to happen at some point, but it's a great example that you give. It's about a person doing something that you wouldn't think that wielding a chainsaw and helping a person cut branches would be something that made such a spiritual impact. But it does. It's an everyday thing that makes a deep spiritual impact, and so that's a really good example. And if anyone needs tree trimming or whatever, we know who's good at chainsaws. So, yes, please.
This also shows that he respected his earthly parents. He honored her by obeying her when she asked
Yeah.
for that favor, as it wasn't his time yet. He made an exception for her.
Darielle, sitting next to her mother, pointed out that he respected his mother, and that had a great deal of respect that his earthly mother he gave respect to, just like his spiritual father. But just the fact that he showed that he cared about his mother and was wanting to take care. So it wasn't just the party goers that he cared about. He cared about his mom and wanted to help her out here. That's a really good example. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I think even with all the compassion, I think his display of his power was undeniable. I think every time you see him perform miracles, never is there a time where somebody says, well, I don't know, I can see somebody else doing that. I think every time it's clear that he has power that surpasses anything that anybody's ever seen.
His power is unique. It's not like it can be faked. It's not like, and it is something that clearly leads to faith. It leads to belief. So I think it's a really good point that he does things in a way that show that it's God's power, and this isn't just some skill he has. That it's special. Yes, please.
I would add to you that statement you said, he does it in a way that shows that the way he did it was also, I think, extremely measured and discerning. In other words, it was clear that this was a powerful thing he did, but he didn't do it with trumpet sounds.
Yeah.
It was, he did it almost in secret, where only a few people
Yeah.
would get this, but they got it clearly. And so he did this amazing thing, making the point, but
It-
really bringing a lot of
He did, yeah. It was careful and subtle and respectful, and it wasn't an attempt to point glory to him at all. It revealed his glory, it says, but it wasn't an attempt for him to try to get personal glory. So yeah, it's so important for us to just see that this is. I thought about some other scenarios in which Jesus was just in a secular situation and did something that was just thoughtful and kind and helpful. Feeding the multitudes even. That's a really good example of people that he said, these people don't have any food. They don't, and so let's give them food. And it wasn't done in a way that was to be showy, and it was done because he wanted to help them out. We see him attending, we'll see stories we hear about him, and it's just because he's at a funeral. He just went to a friend's funeral. So I wanted to maybe just glean from this story that there are regular, everyday things that may not even be particularly religious in nature that make a huge impact, that demonstrate godly living, that demonstrate godly decision-making, done with subtlety and humility. And it's just so important for us to see that Jesus was about that. He wasn't just about big spectacles, which he wasn't about that much at all. He was about helping people who had need in the moment that they needed it, in the opportunity that they needed it. And so I think that's really some of the things we'd like to. We'll come back to that maybe, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time if you might turn over to John 2. We're going to I'm sorry, you were already in John 2. We're going to continue on in John 2. And so we're going to talk about Jesus and what we refer to as cleansing the temple. So I think you know why these two scenarios, in a conservative church, you might not think that two of the most important stories that we have recorded in the Bible about Jesus were about him making wine and about him swinging a whip. And they're both in John 2, but these say something about Jesus that demonstrate qualities that we need to learn from. And so in John 2, and I'll say this right off the bat, we're going to look at John 2 and Matthew 21. Both of them tell of the scene where Jesus goes into the temple and it says he was cleansing the temple, or casting out the money changers. I do not know the answer to whether this happened twice. One of them is right here at the beginning of his ministry, and the other is at the end. So this one is about him when he enters Jerusalem. And when he goes in, as we talk about the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and then we have this scene of him doing this. And then we also have in Matthew 21, entering Jerusalem, but much later. There are two different, there are people who say this was the same scene recorded by two different writers at different times. I'm more inclined to see that, and I don't have any great insight. But there are others that say he did this same thing twice. I don't know the answer to that, unless someone here has insight to that. Okay, so let's look at this and see what we can learn from it. So in John 2, starting at verse 13, it says, "The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and within the temple grounds he found those who were selling sheep, oxen, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables." Just to paint the picture of this Jerusalem at Passover, this won't be exactly accurate, but it's just a general idea that this is a place that usually had about 25,000 people in it. It was about a third of a mile square, 200 acres about. The best I can give is if you take from this building to Florida College and make a square, that's Jerusalem. That's the size of Jerusalem. Had 20-something thousand people. In fact, Temple Terrace, I think, has about 25,000 people. Am I right? Does anybody know the answer to that? I think it's about that. During Passover, it had 150,000 people in it, maybe more at times, and just swarmed with people coming there. Imagine this, this little side of Temple Terrace here having 100,000 people around it. That's the scene of Jerusalem. And it says in the temple grounds is where there were people selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers at their tables. And so you all know this, I'll just reiterate it, that first of all, people had to come and they had to pay a temple tax. And so they had to pay the temple tax in a very particular coin, and so they had to be able to get that coin in order to pay the tax. They also would want to come and make a sacrifice. And in many cases, they weren't going to travel from wherever they came from with an ox or with an animal. And so they would come in and they would find people selling all of these things so they could buy a dove or an ox or a sheep and they could sacrifice it. And so there was commerce going on for people selling these things and for people helping people change money, particularly for paying tax. So this is what Jesus walks into. Best I can tell, just that this was in kind of the outer parts. I saw a lot about perhaps this was really where the Gentiles would have been trying to take part. What's that? Yeah, in that outer court, and so maybe that exacerbated the situation. I don't know. But in this situation, he walked in and he saw people selling these animals and money changers at their tables. And it says he made a whip of cords and drove them all out of the temple area with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money on the changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, "Take these things away from here. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me," quoted from the Psalms. So the first thing I think is so interesting about this is that there may be a perception that Jesus came in and saw this and flew off the handle or had a knee-jerk reaction to what he saw there and just started going crazy. What tells us that it was not a flying off the handle knee-jerk reaction in the telling of this? What's that? Yeah, the first thing it says is he made a whip of cords. That means that he saw this and went and fashioned a whip before he did it. This was not just losing his temper. This was something he did intentional. He took the time to make a whip of cords, it says, and used that and swung it to drive out it says, drive them all out. The animals, the people, all of the money that was there, he dumped it on the ground, knocked over the tables, and told them, stop making my Father's house a place of business. Before we continue, I'll just read what's in Matthew 21 in verse 10. This is where it says, after he'd entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, saying, who is this? The crowds were saying, this is Jesus the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. And Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all those who were selling and buying on the temple grounds. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling the doves. And he said, it is written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. I saw a note that the actual quote from Isaiah is that my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. And it says, and you're making it a den of robbers. So I think that probably in our picture in our minds of Jesus and his demeanor and how he related to people and the way he gravitated toward children and lowly people, this is a scene that's hard for us sometimes, I think, in our heads to jive with that. Him swinging a whip he made and kicking over, dumping over tables. Why did he do this? What motivated him to do this?
The temple was God's house.
Okay.
And here's Jesus, the Son of God, and they're defaming the temple area. And you can't do that in God's house.
So, and I think you pointed out one of the most important things about this is that because he says, my Father's house, a place, he takes this personally, and he says, you have taken God's thing. So he's not protecting himself here. He's saying you are taking God's thing and you have defamed it. You are misusing it and disrespecting God's house. Why does he say it's being disrespected? I mean, clearly there were things going on here maybe that were just could have been supportive or helpful, but why is it that he recognized this as something that was making it a den of robbers?
Well, it said that the exchange rate was not a fair exchange rate.
So yeah, he clearly saw that there was not fairness going on, that there was, price gouging. I hate to say it, but as soon as I say the words price gouging, I think of the movie theater, and I think of the $5 Cokes or Starbucks coffee or whatever. That the idea there of price gouging, taking advantage of people who have limited resources, it's a terrible thing to do to people. Yes, please. I'm sorry, repeat that last part again. Say it again.
Well, I think, like you said before, like people could have been selling all the animals for like sacrifices, which that seems like a really cheap way for people to
Yeah. Yeah, there's two sides to that. So one might be that even though it might have been something that was helpful to people needing sacrifices, it might have been that it was really minimizing it. It was really making it overly common. They were not really giving respect to the sacrifice. You talked about indulgences. It's like this idea of making money. So clearly the key here is that when he says it's a place of business, the problem is people are profiting. That in God's house, people are taking advantage of people that are that have limited resources and who have traveled a long way for profit. There's a big part of this that is making God's house a house of commerce. Yes.
So the other thing that we saw, I believe it's at the end of chapter 2, but it's true before chapter 2, and that is that Jesus knew what was in man. He needed no one to tell him what was about a man.
Their intentions. Yeah.
He knew what was in it. So Jesus knew whether there was honesty or dishonesty, number one. Notice that nobody, they say, well, who gives you the authority to do this? They didn't say, no, we're not cheating.
Yeah, they said, who are you? Yeah.
But, so he knew. And so people allow themselves to be driven out if they know that they've been caught, if they know the truth.
Well, clearly there was a recognition here that this wasn't just people doing a favor or helping or doing something that was functional. It was something about making money. And that, I will tell you that there's nothing that corrupts a thing more than when it starts making money. Perhaps you've heard, I'm kind of into documentaries. And I watched another one this week about a yoga instructor who started a cult that went terrible. And I'm going to tell you, it's the same thing every time. It is, as soon as the money starts rolling in, the whole thing is broken. And even the person who maybe once was trying to do good is broken. One of them, I grew up in the 80s, and the televangelist really started to become popular in the 80s. And what was the type of gospel the televangelist most often taught? What was it called? The prosperity gospel. It is, the more you give financially, the more you will gain financially. And so we find televangelists who were extremely rich. And so the idea of money and profit and maybe even competitive commerce corrupts religion. It corrupts spirituality. And even in reading the Bible, there is almost no way to take seeking profit and being in Christ and make them work well together. Or a spiritual organization and profit. They are totally incompatible. And so he recognized that, and he came and he said, I'm having none of this. Just the idea that he came in, Hosanna, Hosanna, people laying down palm branches, walking him in on a donkey. And he goes in and sees just people taking advantage and all of the qualities that Jesus was teaching. They were doing the opposite. They were taking advantage of the poor. They were price gouging. They were taking advantage of of people being motivated by spiritual things and making money off of it. Jesus was having none of it. Our time is up. I see people starting to come in now. We'll finish up this on Sunday, and we'll continue on from there. I appreciate your input tonight.